Everyone, welcome to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman, founder of FalcFans.com. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Scott Karasik, who writes for the Falcoholic. We are back for our first show of 2016. We are going to be reviewing the Falcons' Week 17 loss to the New Orleans Saints. We'll be talking about some big picture stuff, trying to put the entire 2015 season in perspective now that it's over. We'll be talking a little bit about some of the comments that Matt Ryan and Roddy White made recently on the radio and in print, and sort of talk about how that affects the offense and where that goes. And as usual, we will answer your mailbag questions at the end of the show. So, Scott, you and I both hate losing to the Saints. So let's get that out of the way as soon as possible so we can actually get to some conversations that we actually want to have. But the Falcons lost. They had many opportunities to end the game well. They had a red zone turnover with Devontae Freeman's fumble. They had the penalty from Andy Levitre that pretty much took 3 points off the board. And Matt Ryan threw an interception. All of this happened in the fourth quarter. They also had an earlier field goal block, So basically, classic 2015 Falcons where they had opportunities to win the game, but they did not take advantage of them. So what are the other thoughts that you had on the game, and were there any players that you thought stood out?
I mean, it was a pretty good game for the most part. Outside of some miscues in the red zone, which has been the Falcons season all year. And that crazy I thought Matt Ryan had a good game outside of the interception. He had a couple balls that were thrown deep that he overthrew the receiver, but you would rather have him overthrow everybody so that no one can catch it if he's going to miss that deep. That's the acceptable play there. When Joe Flacco misses deep, it's okay because he overthrows his receiver. It's either his receiver is fast enough to catch it or no one can get it, and that's what you want. The offensive line was good for the most part. What was nice is we didn't have to worry about a fumbled snap. The one snap that was fumbled wasn't because it was a bad snap. It was because Matt Ryan pulled out a little too quick. So that was more on him than on Gradkowski. Falcons do need a center, though. Let's just be honest here. No one on this roster right now is going to be the starting center next year. I honestly don't know if any of them are going to be the backup center next year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens this offseason at center. I think considering the circumstance, I thought Gradkowski had a solid game, but he has basically the same limitations that he's kind of undersized. He has decent athleticism, but he's basically a guy that any time he faces a big nose tackle, he's going to struggle. And thankfully, the Saints' nose tackles aren't great or anything. Like John Jenkins is okay, and Tyler Davison is okay, or whoever else they have in the middle. But when we face, if he has to face Star Latulele next year, then that's probably not going to go well for him. So I agree with you. The center position is one of those positions that's in flux going into this offseason.
Yeah, center, and then I'd say potentially both guard positions, just because Levitre can be cut and have a ton of, well, not a ton, but have a ton of cap space in the future and have about $1.5 million added to this year. But the Falcons cap situation for the next few years is ridiculous. They've got 48 players signed right now for next year, and they've got $28.9 million in cap space. They've got 59.7, and that's only assuming a 165 salary cap for 2017. And then 2018, they're projecting 95 million, and that's projecting even less of a increase to just 170.
Well, to me, I think the 2018 is going to be the interesting year because by then you were kind of thinking Trufont's going to have a big contract, an extension.
Trufant and Alfred.
Maybe y'all have heard. Jake Matthews' contract is going to be coming up around that time too. So it's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be the time where they might have to make some tough choices about who they're going to keep.
Well, this 2018, the $90 million in cap space, that's including having Levitri with $7 million counting towards it, Soliai with a $6.5 million counting towards it, Tyson Jackson with 4.25 counting towards it, Brooks Reed with 4.5 counting towards it. So I mean, that's $20 million right there. That'll pay for Jake Matthews, Robert Alford, and Desmond Trufant easily for that year. Easily. And that's just, you get rid of Levitri, the 7 plus 6.5 plus the 4.5 plus the 4.25. Why is my freaking my keyboard not working?
Well, we'll see. I mean, there's only really like 9 guys signed through 2018. Looking at, there's more guys, but some of these guys aren't going to be there. So it's, there's about 40 that are missing from the roster. We have no idea what their contract situation is going to be. So it's hard to sit here and say just because we're projected at how much cap space in 2018, it's going to shrink every year from here on out. So, it's just going to depend. It really just boils down to certain guys on this roster are going to get big second contracts. And then, assuming that they deserve it. And we're looking at, Devontae Freeman, Jake Matthews, Desmond Trufant, maybe Robert Alford, maybe Rashid Hageman, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And then it's going to be interesting to see when we get to like 2018, that's going to be when this year's rookie class is going to be up for free agency. So it's going to be interesting to see what about Jalen Collins, what about Grady Jarrett, Tevin Coleman, et cetera, et cetera. So all I'm saying is I think certain guys, we might have to wind up letting go of certain players, some of our second-tier players that are good players, but just because we can't afford to have one guy making $30 million and then another guy making $20 million. You just have to make decisions, good financial decisions. You have to decide who are your core players that you want to invest in long-term and who are the guys that are replaceable. And that to me is going to be the interesting thing with the cap situation in the future, especially Matt Ryan gets a second contract because he'll be due for one around that time. We either moving on from Matt Ryan or we'll be paying him more money in 2018.
I don't think there's any reason to move on from Matt Ryan.
Right now, I don't think so, but 2018 is 3 years away, so a lot of stuff can happen in the next 3 years.
Unless his career crashes and burns like something we've never seen before. I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback where his career just crashed and burned after pretty much 10 successful years in the league.
Well, I don't think Matt Ryan's going anywhere through at least 2017. I think there's at least 2 solid years. Now, if his play doesn't pick up over the next 2 years, then I think we can actually start to have a conversation of, do the Falcons want to give Matt Ryan a second $20 million a year contract at the age of 33 or 34 or whatever he'll be at that time, or are there going to be alternative options for them? Again, the Falcons take a quarterback, probably not this year, but maybe 2017 to 2018, that's worth taking a look at. Again, all speculation. I'm not saying it's going to happen one way or the other, but 3 years from now, who knows what's going to happen. I mean, 3 years ago, we thought Peter Kahns would be our starting center today, and you saw how that worked out.
True.
All right, I was just going to say, you got anything else you want to say about the Saints game, or do you want to move on to other topics?
Let's move on. Fuck the Saints.
All right. Let's talk about the whole season in perspective. What are your sort of biggest takeaways from this season, and sort of when we look back at this season a couple of years from now, what's gonna be the overriding narrative?
It's the first time that the Falcons have a coach that knows what he's doing, has a vision, and didn't have the players to have immediate success. Now, there's times when they've had a coach who knew what he was doing and either had a bunch of players to have some immediate success, or they had a bunch of talent with no good coaching. So it's the first time they've had actually really good coaching. I'm talking all phases. Keith Armstrong's a hell of a coach. Dan Quinn's a hell of a coach for that defense. And then, I mean, how this defense got to be 15th in pretty much every category, which, Aaron, is where I said they would be.
You did?
Before the season, because I believed in Dan Quinn, and I believed that adding Vic Beasley was going to help, except for pass rush. For whatever reason, pass rush just didn't work. But that's no big deal. Like, the rest of the team looks so much better. So much better.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I don't disagree with you. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I don't know how good a coach Dan Quinn is. I guess that's the question. That's still the unanswered question for me. Like, I know he's a good coach, but I don't know how good a coach he is. And we're going to see how that plays out. And I think what's going to be one interesting possible narrative, and we'll see how it plays out next year and in future years, is we might look at it and say, oh, Dan Quinn was a lot like Rex Ryan in the sense that he's a great defensive mind, great defensive coach, knows how to get the most out of his defensive players, but sort of the cluelessness on offense holds back how good a team he can put on the field. And so I know a lot of backlash has been directed at Kyle Shanahan this year. And I know both of you and I don't sort of agree with all that backlash. I do think Shanahan deserves a good deal of criticism, but I don't think that means that he should be fired. But it's going to be interesting. I think one of the things that we could come to find out as we look back at this season a couple of years ago is Dan Quinn made a mistake by giving Kyle Shanahan too much power on offense. And basically, he just handed the keys over to an offensive coordinator that he never really worked with, never really coached against. And that's going to be interesting to see if that winds up being the narrative that we talk about this 2015 season as sort of what kept Dan Quinn from reaching the initial success that I think a lot of us expected him, because we all thought he would match what sort of Mike Smith did in 2008. But when you judge based off of, 2008 versus 2015, probably contrary to a lot of people think, but, judging the first 16 games, I think Mike Smith was a better coach than Dan Quinn has been based off what I've seen this year. But obviously he needs more time to figure things out, and we'll see if he does.
I don't agree with that. I think Mike Smith had a lot more talent handed to him, and a lot more of the talent was ready to be impactful. He had John Abraham in his prime. He had, John Babineau basically getting ready to break out. That 08 team had a bunch of guys who were Pro Bowl caliber. I mean, just looking at the defense, you had Babineau, you had Grady Jackson, you had Abraham. You had Jamal Anderson, who wasn't that good, but, I mean, that happens. But you had Boley, Curtis Lofton, and Keith Brooken. Probably the best linebacking core the Falcons have had of the past decade. Outside of maybe 11's Mike Peterson, Lofton with Weatherspoon group.
I don't quite agree with that. Boley was terrible in 08. Brooking was terrible in 08.
Boley was excellent in 08.
No, Boley was excellent in 07. He was not good in 08. He got benched for Corey Wire midway through that season. Like, we didn't have our number one corner in 08 was Chris Houston. Our safeties were Eric Coleman and Lawyer Malloy. Hey, we had John Abraham, but other than that, I don't think we can look at the 08 team and say it was significantly more talented than this 2015 team. We had a rookie quarterback. Michael Turner was probably, I think Michael Turner had a better season than Devontae Freeman had, but I wouldn't sit here and say that he was significantly more talented than Devontae was.
I think they had equally good seasons. They were just different. Because Turner's was all on the ground, where Freeman was a mix of ground and air. Freeman has receiving ability that Turner just has never had.
I would definitely say the first half of Devontae Freeman, he was outpacing Turner, but I think second half of the season kind of came back down to earth so that Turner, passed him by the end. But again, it's negligible. And I certainly wouldn't say, Roddy White back in 08 and Julio. I'd probably say Julio was better, but it's basically a wash. We had no tight ends then. I think Tammy's better than, Justin Peele. Offensive line was better because it was a more cohesive unit, but it was a rookie left tackle, Todd Weiner, Justin Blaylock, who wasn't really that good, a second-year player, 2 undrafted players, Harvey Dahl, So I think Mike's, again, I know we had this revisionist history where we try to pretend that Mike Smith was never a good coach, but I think Mike Smith got more out of his team than Dan Quinn got out of this team this year. It's not me saying Dan Quinn's the worst coach in the world. I'm just saying I think we got to give Mike Smith a little bit of credit. He did a better job. I mean, he did have 5 good years, but people want to pretend like those years never happened, but it is what it is.
I do think he had a little more talent at his hands, at least 2010, 2012, that range for sure. 2009, definitely. It's a shame Ryan got hurt partway through that 09 season. And that Elam just got the, what would you call those? The yips?
No, I would definitely say that Mike Smith had more. Once we get, Tony Gonzalez to the mix, and once we get a couple more pieces in those drafts in 09 and later, certainly he had more talent then. But I think when you consider, would you rather have 08 Matt Ryan versus 2015 Matt Ryan? I think whatever talent deficiencies you had on the rest of the roster, the difference, the night and day difference of where Matt Ryan is, at least where he should be, 7 years into his NFL career versus when he was a rookie. Like, I know Matt Ryan had a great rookie season for a rookie, but by and large, if you watch it and compare him to other NFL starters, he was an average starting quarterback that year compared to other NFL starters, as rookies are supposed to be. Rookies aren't good as rookies, rookie quarterbacks. They're just a good rookie season is an average season. But again, I know that's not going to be popular because everybody believes that Dan Quinn is the greatest thing that ever happened to coaching and Mike Smith is the worst thing that ever happened to coaching. So we can move on if you want to talk about Matt Ryan and Roddy White's comments.
I do think that we've got to give Quinn a little bit more talent to work with.
I agree.
So
again, I'm only judging the first 16 games versus each other's first 6 games. It's not a fair sample size to really say definitively one way or the other. But if we're just judging off of that, that's all I'm saying.
Because I'm looking at this 2011 defense that had Nicholas and Lofton and Weatherspoon in the middle, Abraham, Peters, Babineau, Edwards. As bad as Ray Edwards was, he was a decent player in 2011 when he got 3.5 sacks, which is what, a half sack less than what Vic Beasley got, and was playing good run defense.
Yeah.
We all talk a lot of shit about Ray Edwards, but he was a decent player for that scheme. The issue was that he wasn't a good fit for Mike Nolan's team at all. And Mike Nolan said, this guy's a pretty boy prima donna. I don't want him on my defense.
Van Gorder said the same thing. That's why he pulled him off the field in nickel situations that last month of the season.
That's true. And put Croy Bierman in instead.
Yeah.
Although Bierman had a pretty good season there that year.
That 2011 defense I think is underrated. I think they played better than probably people think. That was definitely the best Van Gorder defense we had, I think.
Yeah, like I didn't understand why Van Gorder got fired after that year because I think like between the combination of Bierman and John Abraham, the end on the other side of Abraham did pretty well that year. It was like 6 sacks and good run defense. And then Babineau had, I want to say Babineau had 3 sacks that year, 4 sacks that year. Like, that was a pretty good year for the defense. He may have, okay, he had 1 sack, but the defense as a whole, was probably the Falcons' best pass rush out of any years in the past, in the Matt Ryan era at least.
Yeah.
Which again may not be saying much because it's like the pass rush just completely left us in 08, but it is what it is.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Matt Ryan and Roddy White's comments on the offense being a little difficult to pick up. I know you have some thoughts on this, Scott, so I'll let you have the floor.
So the biggest thing that we always kept hearing back when Michael Vick was here was that the West Coast offense takes 3 years to learn. 3 years to learn. You know, it takes every quarterback 3 years to do it, no matter if they're the best quarterback in the world, the smartest quarterback out there, blah, 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 blah. We saw it with Peyton Manning this year, who's arguably the smartest quarterback in NFL history when it comes to football. I don't know how he is in anything else, but when it comes to football, it's almost inarguable that Peyton Manning is the best quarterback of all time up here.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So when you throw that out there and you're like, all right, well, Peyton Manning's struggling with the West Coast offense, maybe that explains why Matt Ryan had issues with it. Peyton Manning was throwing the same uncharacteristic interceptions that he hadn't really thrown in his career.
Not since he was a rookie.
Not since he was, I don't know. He had a bad year in 01. He had a bad year in 2012. Like, the thing is, people rip on Matt Ryan, but when you look at Peyton Manning's career, he has 4 seasons with interceptions more than what Matt Ryan put up this year. 5 seasons with more interceptions than what Ryan put up this year. Dude's been playing for 15 years, but, like, he's got 5 seasons with more interceptions than Ryan. And he had a nice little drop-off at age 30, just like Ryan had, where for that one season, it just seemed like nothing was really clicking. And then the year after, he explodes. Because they changed offenses that year. Caldwell did something a little different. Caldwell got into Moore's ear and did something a little different. And the offense changed a little bit, and then boom, he had a nice little explosion. I think you'll see the same thing with Matt Ryan this year, 2016. He had a little bit of a drop-off, which is pretty normal for this kind of offense. And even then, he didn't have that much of a drop-off. If you look at his stats last year to this year, what's the difference? 2 interceptions?
Yeah, something like that.
More, He threw 14 picks last year. He threw 16 picks this year. This wasn't even his worst season. His worst season was 2013 when he threw 17 picks. Granted, 6 of those were intended for Harry Douglas, but that's neither here nor there. Throwing 16 interceptions for pretty much any quarterback isn't that horrible of a year. The real issue is the timing of them all. They were calling a play right at the end of the game. It was obvious that the pressure was getting to him because he wasn't 100% comfortable in the offense. But you compare what he did last year to this year, in terms of completion percentage, yards per attempt, almost identical.
Okay. Yeah. I would
almost identical. There weren't as many big plays because we didn't take the big shots. There weren't as many touchdowns because Devontae Freeman was actually providing a red zone threat on the ground to score those touchdowns. that Atlanta hasn't had since Michael Turner in 2012. Because despite Michael Turner being shitty in 2012, he was still a bowling ball. So it takes a couple of years to really get into the West Coast offense. And when it comes to the zone blocking scheme, I don't understand why all the radio analysts in Atlanta don't like it. I really don't. It's a tried and true proven system that will continually put out a random 1,000-yard rusher every single year. No one expected Devontae Freeman to run for 1,000 yards. And I think, honestly, had there been better center and guard play, he probably would have put up closer to 1,200 to 1,300 yards. Because he was getting pushed back and hitting behind the line pretty much every single one of those last 4 games. He was sitting there fighting a tackle off behind the line and then going for some yardage. So there is talent here. There is a lot of good scheme. I like Shanahan's scheme. I think it's the best fit for Atlanta's talent long term. It may not have been the best fit for Atlanta's talent in 2015, but the long term, the West Coast fit, where you've got Julio Jones running the same routes that Jerry Rice was running back in the day. When you've got Jacob Tamme coming out of nowhere, looking like a competent receiving tight end, I would be perfectly fine if Jacob Tamme starts next year. Just because there's not a good tight end in the draft, and it's pointless to waste money on a tight end. And he's making like $1.8 million, so it's not that bad. Unless you're getting Tony Gonzalez or Jimmy Graham from a couple years back, or like Travis Kelce or Gronkowski, don't pay for a tight end. Don't pay $7-8 million for a tight end. It's not worth it. I mean, you got to get someone special. So, yeah, do the Falcons need to upgrade at tight end? Yeah. Is it going to be hard to find an upgrade over what Tamme did this year? Yeah. Tamme did a great job this year. Do they need an upgrade over wide receiver number 2? Yeah. Roddy White's done. I mean, if Roddy White could have at least been, a shell of what he was, he wouldn't have had to have those last couple of. I mean, White dropped 2 passes against the Saints. He dropped a 15-yarder that would have been a first down on a 2nd and 10, and he dropped that deep bomb that would have been easily a 70-yard touchdown from where he was on the field. Just not even close. Dropped the pass right out of his hand. Like, just awful. So, yeah, you've got to get talent around Matt Ryan. Again, that's not like they've got 2 pieces out of what they could get. So it's just frustrating when you've only got 2 of the right pieces in your offense. There's only so much you can do. 1 second. Aaron kind of fell out. I mean, I don't know. The bigger issue was the offensive line, too. More than anything else. The Falcons just didn't have the right players on the offensive line for that scheme to work. When you're not able to put in, when you're having snap issues, when you're having issues with the guards, when you're having issues just getting anything to work, I don't get it. I really don't. All right, let me see what's going on with Aaron. All right, so Aaron's internet dropped. So give me a second. Let me see. Apologies for these technical difficulties. I'd prefer to not close the show out now and get to these mailbag questions. So looking in here, Aaron has a couple. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, sorry about that. Internet didn't want to cooperate.
All good. So I was pointing out to people like, hey, the additional receiver would have been needed. Atlanta needs to fix the offensive line too. You can't really judge this offense. Like, people want to judge an incomplete, talented offense when they don't realize that you need to put, like, when Atlanta doesn't even have a center who knows how to snap the ball. I haven't seen this many center quarterback exchange issues in a pro level offense ever in my life. Like, an NFL offense is having issues snapping the ball. The most basic of basic things. Never seen it happen before in my life. And I think you could say this year there were probably a dozen snaps at least that affected the games. There were 3 or 4 snaps early in the year that were just low, that threw off the timing, so the Falcons were pretty much screwed on that play. It was a low snap. Once Ryan got it and pulled up and looked at the field, there was a pass rusher in the space. Where had it been a decent snap, Ryan could have at least gotten a quick ball off. So I think you get a new center in there. I think you get a new right guard or left guard, depending on what you think you need more. And you got a much better team. And you got a much better offense. And the Falcons will score a lot more points.
Okay. I thought there were, before I got booted or before I lost the connection, I thought there were 2 points that I thought were interesting that you brought up. When you look at Ryan's production in the fall off, you look at some of these advanced metrics or whatever. So you look at like Football Outsiders DVOA. I think Matt Ryan was like 8th or 9th in DVOA last year, and he dropped to like 18th this year. But he was still in the same group. He was right around the same numbers as Aaron Rodgers and Eli Manning and Teddy Bridgewater and these sort of quarterbacks, where I think it's fair to say that Matt Ryan did have a down year. But I do think people overestimate sort of his down year was so terrible that now he has to be replaced. And I think, no one talks about Aaron Rodgers' down year, and no one's going to talk about Aaron Rodgers' down year, probably because, he's won a Super Bowl and whatnot, and so he gets a little bit more leeway. But it just goes to show that the best quarterback in the league, based off of, advanced numbers, was basically a below-average starter this year. He was like the 17th best quarterback in the league. And it just goes to show you that quarterbacks go up and down. I think people have this expectation that guys are, just steady, and they don't. They go up and down, And I think people need to pump the brakes sort of on this. We need to get rid of Matt Ryan thing because he struggled this year. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, he needs to play better, certainly. The Falcons aren't going to go to the playoffs or win in the playoffs if he doesn't play better. But I think, as you said, Scott, there's reasons to think that he'll be better in the future with better talent around him. And I think in regards to whether Matt Ryan fits in Kyle Shanahan's offense, I think that criticism, I think to a certain extent, it's fair. Like, I don't think this offense is really designed to maximize Matt Ryan's ability. But at the same time, I think this offense is kind of necessary for this team's ability to get maximized. Because I think what gets forgotten in sort of all this talk of look how good Matt Ryan used to be was he wasn't really that good in the postseason. And I think a lot of that was because so much was put on his shoulders in order to carry the offense. And basically, he had to basically just facilitate the offense entirely because we didn't have a good running game. And at least in the years where we did go to the playoffs and had a good running game, we had a terrible defense, so we got behind in these games. And I think what Dan Quinn is trying to build, and that's one of the reasons why he hired Kyle Shanahan, and it's, again, as I pointed out earlier, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and whether Kyle Shanahan is the right guy to do this thing, is that Dan Quinn wants to build a team that's defensive minded, that runs the football, and basically opens up, through that running game, opens up the vertical offense through the play action. Because if we're being honest, Matt Ryan is not a great, I know his accuracy and whatever you look at in deep passes is always relatively good, but that's largely because it's good when he's throwing to Julio. When he's throwing to other receivers, he's kind of just average. And he's just not really geared towards, chucking the ball downfield and hitting receivers. And I think that's a necessary component when you're going to be a team that's going to really be a Super Bowl contender. And so I think the easiest way for you, if you have a quarterback who doesn't have the biggest arm and isn't a guy that's just going to get back there and sling it deep like others, like Joe Flacco or like Ben Roethlisberger or any other of these quarterbacks, then you need to have a style of offense that facilitates those vertical plays because you need them. You can't. That's one of the big reasons why the Falcons were never as successful in the playoffs as the record should have indicated, because they couldn't get explosive plays. And I think having a play action based offense is the right approach, but I do think we might have to, go through Matt Ryan not being the quote unquote top 10 quarterback and having a couple more interceptions, higher interception rates than we're used to seeing, because so much of the Falcons offense was this dink and dunk offense that was geared on let's check it down, let's take profits, let's not take chances under Mike Smith and Mike Mularkey and Dirk Cutter, and we'll be okay as long as we can keep it close to the fourth quarter, and then we'll turn it loose. And I just don't think that's a really sustainable way of winning championships, and I think that's one of the reasons why Mike Smith never had the postseason success that we all wanted him to have. And I do think more time needs to be had for this offense to develop and see potentially if we can get to a higher ceiling. The floor may not be as high as it was, but I think the ceiling is a lot higher with this offense.
I agree. I also think that people are blowing this out of proportion, that Ryan's regressing, blah, blah, blah. It's one down year in his first year of a brand new offense. And I'm not a huge fan of ESPN total QB ranking. I never really have been. But even if you look at it just kind of like to see if it matches with the eye test, it normally does kind of match, at least on a ranking setup, the eye test. And if you look at it, Matt Ryan's 15th. They have Tom Brady 11th. They have Matt Stafford just ahead of Matt Ryan. And just below, you got Mariota and Cutler and Manning and Hoyer and Rivers. Your top 10 this year. Aaron Rodgers had a down year. He's 10th. That should tell you everything you really need to know. Aaron Rodgers is 10th. And the thing with Matt Ryan is it's not even as a passer that he's having issues. Because as a passer, he's up near the top of this. The issue that they're having is they can't close the drives out in the red zone. If instead of turnovers, Atlanta had touchdowns in the red zone, you probably take away 6 of Matt Ryan's interceptions and 3 of his fumbles. You take away a fumble from Freeman. You take away a fumble from Coleman. That's what? And you turn those into touchdowns. That's another, 6. That's 11 plus 11 times 6. That's 11 times 6.
66.
66 divided by 16. That's an extra 4 points a game. So that means the Falcons would have been up 15 more or been up to 25 points a game. You take those 11 more touchdowns, spread them over the 16 games, especially if you concentrate them in those 6 losses. Those 6 losses end up being probably 4 wins and 2 losses. Once you do that, once you really get rid of the turnovers and start scoring touchdowns in the red zone. And red zone is about execution, not about play design. As much as everybody likes to say, oh, it's the play design, oh, it's the play design. No, it's the execution.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, people go to that because you look at Kyle Shanahan's lack of success in the red zone elsewhere. But I think that's kind of a cheap way of looking at it, because I think a lot of red zone is based off of who's your quarterback. And I think one of the things with the Falcons is one of the reasons why we've been so successful in the red zone in previous years, because we had a good quarterback, and good quarterbacks make good decisions in the red zone. But I do think when you actually go and you actually watch the tape, which is what you can glean from it, it's basically, as you said, the turnovers, these sort of fluky turnovers that keep happening to us. I don't think you can blame the offensive coordinator for Devontae Freeman fumbling at the goal line. I don't think you can blame the offensive coordinator for, Tevin Coleman's fumble and all the James Stone's bad snap and all these sort of dumb mistakes that the Falcons have made. It's just like a lack of discipline that has been pervasive on this team this entire season that we just couldn't really fix. And I think that's going to be the big thing for Dan Quinn in terms of truly showing, okay, this is how good a coach I am. This problem that the Falcons dealt with in 2015, I'm going to make serious strides and really preach and do all the things I can to fix it so that it's no longer an issue in 2016. All right, Scott. Are we good on this? Can we move on to the mailbag? We got anything else to add? All right, guys. We appreciate you guys sending all your mailbag questions, and we appreciate not just sending the same who are your top 3 draft targets and who are your top 3 free agent targets. We got a couple of questions like that, but I'm glad we didn't get 50 of those. So keep them coming. Our first question comes from Stephen Brooklyn. Of the guys the Falcons just signed to futures contracts, anyone who might make the 2016 53-man roster? Five of them. Matt Sims. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
That'd be my guess. Like, that's like the only one that might maybe do it. I mean, I don't really like Jordan Leslie. I don't really like CJ Goodwin. I don't really like what's the running back? Gus Johnson. I mean, it's just a bunch of meh. Like, these guys are camp fodder. I hate to put it that way, but it's true. It's what they are. They're nothing special.
I would probably, like, if I was just based off of odds, I'd probably give it to either Matt Sims or Gus Johnson, just because I think they have a smaller hill to climb. But it really depends. Like, I think the Falcons are going to get a veteran quarterback in free agency, so I didn't think that pretty much kills Matt Sims' chances. I thought maybe if they only bring 3 quarterbacks in camp like they did last year, then basically Matt Sims mathematically has a 50-50 shot, which is higher than anybody else, to beat out Sean Renfree. But other than that, I would say Gus Johnson, just because I know people in Dallas liked him this summer, and I don't think Teron Ward has done a whole lot to solidify that spot. He probably is the front runner, but if Gus Johnson has a good preseason, then it wouldn't shock me if they swap out the number 3 running back. But yeah, I would agree with you, Scott. More than likely, these are all camp bodies.
Yeah, and here's the thing: even if Teron Ward doesn't make the roster, even if it is Gus Johnson, who's to say that there's not someone that they draft? There's not a free agent that they sign this offseason that's better.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, what's our roster at right now? 45 guys minus the unrestricted free agents.
48 guys. That's including. I mean, there's 72 officially listed, but take out the unrestricted free agents, the exclusive rights guys, and the restricted guys. I mean, you got some guys like Dante Mock, Xavier Dixon, Curtis Grant. These guys are exclusive rights, so Atlanta could sign them cheap. Even Ricardo Allen is exclusive rights, so Atlanta could sign him cheap too.
Yeah,
like veteran minimum for a second-year player, cheap.
Yeah, just the point I was just going to bring up. There's still 30 to 40 more guys we're going to end up signing this offseason. So it's hard to project how these guys that we just signed to futures contracts are going to stack up, because there's 40% of the camp roster is not on the team yet.
Yeah, 42 players left to be signed, drafted, signed, and that's if they don't cut a single person.
Pretty much. Yeah. All right, our next question comes from Andrew Shawwaller. He asks, totally random question, but I was doing some reading and I just found out about the Earhart-Perkins offense. How come more teams don't run it, and would you like to see Atlanta run it? Now, Andrew, I think this is an interesting question because the Falcons did run the Earhart-Perkins offense. That was the Mike Mularkey system, and that was the system that Cutter essentially ran with some tweaks. So, I mean, I guess if you're one of those people that hates the West Coast offense and Kyle Shanahan, and you want to go back to Dirk Cutter and what Mike Mularkey, where Matt Ryan had a lot of success in it, then sure. Yeah, I guess you probably be in the camp of bringing back the Earhart-Perkins offense. And I think there's still like 6 or 7 teams that run it, so it's not as if it's nobody runs it. Like Pittsburgh and New England and Tennessee, I think ran it this year. I don't know all the teams on the top of my head, but there's quite a few guys that run these systems.
Yeah, it's basically just a power rushing attack with deep passing. That's Earhart-Perkins for the most part. And then whatever you want to do, whatever wrinkle you want to throw in, if it's screens, if it's whatever, that's your signature on it.
Yeah.
So.
All right. David B. Kano asks, is Kamal Ishmael the answer at strong safety?
I mean, he didn't look horrible in the scheme when William Moore was out. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, I thought he did a pretty good job. I think the scheme masks his deficiencies in deep coverage and allows him to just stay underneath, stay in that robber zone, and play the run, that's where he's at his best. Do I think he's the long-term answer? No. Do I think the Falcons could get by with him as a starter for a year, as a stopgap while they waited for the next year to draft the answer? Yeah, I do think they could do that. But Ricardo Allen would have to take a big stride as a free safety, and Ishmael would have to continue to develop into the strong safety that I think he could be. I do think he looked a lot better this year in this defense than he has in the past, because it basically says, hey, all your weaknesses, don't do those. All your strengths, go do those.
I would agree with you. I think the scheme definitely did a better job masking his deficiencies than last year's defense. Do I think he's the answer? No, I don't think he's the answer. I think Ishmael is fine for a stopgap for 4 games here, maybe 6 games here. But for 16 games, I don't think he's the answer. I think, if you're talking about, when you ask that question, is he the answer? So basically, do I imagine a scenario where Kamal Ishmael starts 16 games next year, and then we go into 2017 not thinking that we need a strong safety, not listing strong safety as one of our top 3 to 5 needs going into the offseason? I don't see that as a possibility. I think Kamal Ishmael, even though this scheme does a better job of masking his deficiencies, I still think those deficiencies show up. I don't think his range is quite good enough. I don't think his awareness when, basically in coverage, even though he spends a lot more time in the box and is asked to play more run, he does have to play a lot more in space, and I think that's where he gets limited by what he can do. He's basically a see ball, get ball type of player, and when you're a safety, you have to be a little bit more instinctual than that, because you have to be able to see angles and play in space and all those sort of things. Linebackers can tend to be more of a see ball, get ball type of player, but I think safeties, that just doesn't work out in the NFL. Teams will find out, will expose you once they realize that. And I think, again, short term, Kamal Ishmael's fine for a couple of games, but once you get enough of him on tape, teams are going to be like, oh, we can attack this dude, and we're going to go right after him. And I think that would be what would happen if he was to start.
He's not 225 or 230 pounds, because he'd be a good linebacker in the scheme with how he plays.
He's a tackler. I don't know if he can, shed blocks and do all that stuff, but he's a good tackler.
That's why he'd be 225, 230, because I think if he was that, he'd be better at shedding blocks.
He's already about 225. Someone told me that he looks 225. He's about that
He's
size.
like two. He's like 210, 215.
He's pretty big. Go back and look at him. Go back and watch the Saints game and look at him when he's standing beside Justin Durant. They're about the same size.
Well, let's go take a look. I'll do that later. But
All right.
well, that's a good call. All right. But yeah, no, I like Ishmael. I just don't think he's a long-term answer as the starting strong safety. I do think he's the long-term answer as that third safety that comes in on like dime packages, or that third guy that'll come in on a nickel package when they run a big nickel, or if the strong safety's out for 2 weeks because he's got a messed up knee because he sprained his knee and he's got to go out 2 weeks, you could start him for those 2 weeks and you're not going to have too much of a drop off. But for what he is, he's a great 7th round pick. That's what he is.
Yeah, I like him in his backup, but I think you put him in the starting lineup, you're going to see a lot more of his blemishes like we saw in 2014. All right, our next question comes from your boy J94. He asks, what's Dan Quinn do with Akeem King? Think he gets more playing time in 2016, or is he mainly special teams?
I think long-term Akeem King is going to be that big safety or that big cornerback that comes in, plays in the nickel packages, plays primarily inside, and then especially on bigger receivers, you'll see him. So I think like the Jimmy Grahams, the Rob Gronkowskis of the world, the good tight ends, the big tight ends, the Ben Watsons, you'll see him more and more in man coverage against those guys because that's going to be his role. Basically think Brandon Browner without the stupid penalties going against tight ends.
Okay.
He's got size, he's got length, he's got the ability to jam guys right up front. He's got the strength needed to fight these guys for balls, for 50-50 balls in the air. And he's got a fun attitude on him where you can see he went against Ben Watson, and he probably played it better than anybody could have on this roster. On that crucial 3rd down play to force the punt, he turned around, he found the ball in the air, his back was to the ball, but he was looking back and he had somehow found the ball and tipped it away at the perfect time. If he can continue to make plays like that, or at least be in the right position to make plays like that, he'll go a long way in the NFL as a nickel type safety corner slash guy. You know, I say safety corner slash. I know Aaron doesn't agree that he'd be a safety, but I say safety corner slash because it's going to be a guy who's going to be matched up on a tight end. And you don't normally put a basic corner on a tight end. You put basically a bigger safety or a bigger corner who can man up with him on that kind of guy. And I think that's his best fit. I think that's why he was drafted. Hey, we've got this guy that can do 2 things. He can play special teams and he can man up on tight ends. And for the Falcons, if that's all they really need from you and that's all you can do, I'm sure a lot of Falcons fans would have Akeem King jerseys lined up out the block because he'd be the only guy that could cover Ben Watson against the Saints.
Okay. I'm not as high on Akeem King as you are, Scott. I think him as a safety, I think he's a decent safety in a pinch, like we almost were on Sunday because all of our safeties got hurt and we only activated like 3 guys. So I think he can be the emergency force safety, but I don't see him leapfrogging guys like Ishmael or Ricardo Allen or Therese on the depth chart as a safety. My expectations for King in 2016, I think at best he's going to be the 5th corner. I think we'll either bring back Phillip Adams or sign another veteran free agent that should easily be higher than Akeem King on the depth chart. I think Akeem King's his primary role, if he's going to stick beyond 2016, I think it's going to be because he proves himself to be an asset on special teams. If he doesn't come out and he doesn't show himself to be a 4-core special teams player, which he's capable of becoming this next summer, then I think best case scenario is he sticks around through the 2016 season, is inactive a bunch of weeks, get a couple of games here on special teams, and then we draft somebody in 2017 in the middle of the draft, and that he's pushed off the roster by then. So I hope Akeem Dean outperforms my expectations, but I think best case scenario is one more year of him playing special teams, and then we move on. All right, we got a bunch from Brosif. Our first one from Brosif929 is, who do you feel was the most disappointing player this season?
I'm going to do one on each side of the ball. On offense, Roddy White. I didn't think he was that done. And he is. He's done. On defense, I'm going to go with Brooks Reed. When I'm saying Troy Bierman outplayed Brooks Reed, that's both sad and true.
Okay. Yeah, I think Roddy's probably the obvious choice on offense. Defense, most disappointing player. One name springs to mind, but I know people are going to hate me for saying it. But I'll say Willie Moe. He's probably the most disappointing player. I thought he would have a much better season.
He is right there with. I'm in agreement with you. He's right there with Brooks Reed. For what they're getting paid and what they produced, I'm disappointed. Between William Moore, Paul Warlow, and Justin Durant, Atlanta had probably 3 of the worst players in the league at those spots based on how they played in 15. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on Justin Durant. I don't care.
Okay.
Most of the years he's looked at during the Saints game where he was just getting destroyed, getting lost, taking bad angles, missing tackles. I'm tired of seeing shitty linebacker play in Atlanta. Warlow's not fast enough for this scheme. If you took Warlow's instincts and combined them with Ishmael's speed and tackling ability, you'd have one hell of a linebacker.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just not as down on those guys as you. I think Durant has the right combination of speed and instincts. I just think his tackling can be subpar at times because he's 230 pounds, and sometimes he'll bounce off of a guy. And, I think it's fair to say that when Durant was bad this year, he was bad. But I don't think he was especially bad consistently week in and week out. I don't think Brooks Reed was bad. I think he was fine. Was he overpaid? Certainly. But we shouldn't, it's the same thing with Tyson Jackson last year. It wasn't that Tyson Jackson was terrible in 2014. It was just he was overpaid for what his skill set was. I think Brooks Reed was the same player in Atlanta that he was in Houston. It's just we overpaid for that player. And so that raised expectations for him to be something more than what he was. And again, I don't think Brooks Reed is going to last beyond next year, but I think he'll be back next year. I think he'll be fine for what the scheme asked this Sam linebacker to do, which isn't a whole lot. Yeah. So I don't think those guys are as bad as people are making them out to be. I think you put Durant and Reed beside a good middle linebacker, and I think you'll see a light year difference between their play in 2015 and 2016. But, when you have a black hole at middle linebacker, I think it sucks in the surrounding players. All right. Brosif929 asks, who do you think will have a better season next year?
Rashid Hageman. We were seeing flashes toward the end of the season where when he just put it on and he got good leverage, he was creating havoc in the backfield, and the whole defense looked better when he was dominating the guy in front of him. And when you've got Babineau creating penetration and Jarrett creating penetration and Hageman creating penetration, and you got that interior pass rush actually working, it's fun to see because it helps the exterior guys get more play. So I think Hageman and Jarrett will both have better seasons. I think they're going to be the featured defensive tackles on the inside. They're going to see that 55-60% of the snaps next year, probably some of it together, with Jarrett in the one technique and Hageman over at the 3. And I think we'll have some fun watching them create some havoc and punish the pocket and penetrate and create some sacks on the inside.
Okay. I think most of the players are going to have a better season next year. I think probably with the exception of Julio and Ryan Schrader, just because he'll be playing much better players than he faced this year. And probably, maybe Alfred or Trufant, maybe, just because I think all 4 of those guys probably played some of their best football we've seen to date. And so there's always kind of a tendency for those guys to dip a little bit. But I think generally speaking, most of the roster will be better next year. But if you want me to single out one guy that I think is going to make a huge leap, I guess I would have to point out probably Beasley or Jake Matthews. I think this, third year should be the big year for Jake Matthews. So next year should be the year where he takes a significant step forward and become the player that we think he's capable of being. So I'll go with those two guys. All right, we got one from Evan Birchfield. He asks, give us some bold predictions about next season. For example, player achievements, record, etc. Bold predictions. Let's go, man. Here's one. Tevin Coleman will have more rushing yards than Devontae Freeman. Is that bold enough?
Here's my bold one. Devontae Freeman is going to go to his 2nd Pro Bowl as a running back and have more rushing and receiving yards than he did this year. Aaron and I are going to fight about these running backs, even though dude, it's your cousin. You're all like talking shit about your cousin.
I'm not talking shit about him. I'm just not proclaiming him to be Marshall Faulk or Jim Brown or Walter Payton. That's all. I think he's a good player. I think he's an excellent player.
No, I mean, he's not those guys, but he's at least D'Angelo Williams.
Yeah, I think look, he wanted a bold prediction. I can't think of anything else. Like if I said, Vic Beasley's going to have 10 sacks. Is that bold? I mean, I think that was the expectation.
No, but saying he'll get 15 might be bold. Like what I'm going to say.
Okay.
Saying that Ricardo Allen looks like a Pro Bowl caliber free safety next year, which I think he will, because it's a lot easier with Alford and Trufant out there.
Okay. Right.
Maybe Grady Jarrett getting 5 sacks and taking the starting job from Paul Soliai partway through the year.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any other bold predictions right now based off of, we'll see what players we get in free agency in the draft, and I can probably make a little bit more as we see the things shape together. But right now, it's hard to say anything crazy. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say Matt Ryan's going to throw 4 interceptions next year. I'm not willing to be that bold. So, okay. Our next one from Evan Birchfield is, how did this season meet your expectations?
Outside of some bad luck in a couple games, it was exactly what I thought it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I had us go 9-7 at the start of the year. I thought our wins and losses would be a little bit more spread out. I thought our second half would be better than our first half of the season, and it seemed like that was reversed. The defense was better than I thought it was going to be. The offense was worse than I thought it was going to be. But, it wasn't crazy off. Devontae Freeman, had a much better season than I thought he was going to have. Yeah, I can't really think of anything else that I was like, oh, that really caught me by surprise. I thought Matt Ryan would play better than what he did, certainly. And yeah, I thought the offensive line would get better as the season wore on, as opposed to starting strong and then finishing weak. There you go. All right. Evan Birchfield has another one. He asked, do you think any coaching changes will be made like positional coaches?
I don't know. I don't think anyone gets fired, but you could see a pass rushing coach get added, especially since a lot of these guys, maybe a quarterback coach gets fired too, and you add someone. There's a couple of names out there that do make some sense. I was looking at it earlier just in preparation for the show. I know I did research before the show. Crazy.
I know, it's crazy.
The names for quarterback coach, John DeFilippo, who's the Browns quarterbacks coach, or Browns offensive coordinator right now. He has connection with Shanahan in a roundabout way through previous stops. You've also got, what's his name? I saw it earlier. Guy just got fired. Tennessee Titans. You've got Giff Smith as their defensive line coach. He's very good pass rushing coach. They did a great job this year. He's the one that coordinates their schemes up front, decides how and when they want to create pressure. I think he does a good job there. Another good one was the Steve Spagnuolo, Robert Nunn combination in New York. Very good coaches. Robert Nunn has done a great job with that defensive line. Because Tom Coughlin left, you might be able to poach some of these guys. I'd love either Mike Sullivan or Ben McAdoo to come to Atlanta and be a quarterback's coach. I think they both do a great job and have always done a great job. So, I mean, when I'm looking at coaches, I'm looking at basically defensive coordinators, defensive line coaches, potential offensive coordinators who could be the quarterback's coach. Like Pat Shurmur might not be a bad quarterback's coach to have. He did his best work with the Eagles in 2002 to 2008. And he's got connection by proxy to Dan Quinn through Holmgren and that Mariucci connection. And then who is the other one? There was one more that I saw. Oh, it was not the Lions. Someone else got fired. Who else got fired? Rams. 49ers. That whole defensive staff in the 49ers, Scott Brown, Jason Tarver, Eric Mangini, like every single one of those guys is just excellent at doing their job. They have Tim Lewis as their defensive backs coach. Like, pretty much Atlanta could get any one of their defensive coaches and bring them into the staff, and I'd be like, hey, that's a good move. You got a bunch of former defensive coordinators. You got Mangini, you got Pendergast, you got Tarver, you got Tim Lewis. All four of those guys deserve spots on someone else's roster as a coach next year. Quarterbacks, I don't think they've got really anybody that I would want to coach these quarterbacks. But yeah, the names for quarterbacks, we want to steal anybody we can from the Giants is what it looks like in their coaching staff.
Okay. All right. Jason Tarver is an interesting name that you mentioned because he coached with Quinn in San Francisco. I didn't realize he was available. I think there's probably going to be at least one change. There almost always is year to year with the coaching staff. You do guys leave, guys come in. We're about to talk about this specifically, so I'll just mention it. I do think they'll probably try to bring in somebody else on the offense to sort of balance out Shanahan's influence. I've talked about this before. I think Greg Knapp is as good a candidate as anybody just because he worked with Quinn many times, runs a similar scheme. And I do think Quinn will be probably in his best interest to hire somebody that he could potentially replace Shanahan with midway through the season if things don't quite get off to the fast start and there's really no other sort of offensive assistant coach that has a ton of play calling experience. I know Rubisky has done some play calling, but I think it's been like 8 years since he had ever called a play in the NFL, so that probably wouldn't be an ideal situation. So bringing in someone like Greg Knapp makes sense to me. But that brings up our next question, and I guess we'll get
Knapp away from the Broncos. That's not happening for a lateral move.
Okay. I think when Peyton Manning retires, then I think there'll be maybe we'll see. But I guess that answers Andrew's question because he basically asked, "What do you think about what Aaron said, bringing in someone to help with the offense, specifically Greg Knapp?" So you're shooting up.
Unless you're getting Ben McAdoo or Mike Sullivan or what's his name, Jim Caldwell. Unless you get one of those guys or even like Jim Bob Cooter, it's pointless to bring in someone else to run this offense. Just let them do their thing.
Okay.
And I don't think there's going to be an issue with Shanahan next year. I don't think he's got too much influence or whatever the thought process is. I think people are blowing up too much about a first-year offensive coordinator having struggles in a scheme that takes a couple of years to learn and, didn't really look that bad, just didn't score the way it should have in the red zone.
I think, again, as I said earlier, I think the idea of firing Shanahan, I think, is going too far. But I do think a lot of the criticism that Shanahan has garnered are fair criticisms. And I do think the Falcons, we'll see how it goes. Again, I'm not for firing Kyle Shanahan. I think he deserves an opportunity, but if he doesn't make significant changes to what he's doing this year, and he basically says, "I'm going to do it my way, in this way that I'm going to do it, I'm going to force it," it's not going to work. It's not going to work. That's what I'll say. He needs the biggest change he needs to make this offseason, and if he doesn't make that change, then he's gone. He's not going to last to 2017. He needs to allow Matt Ryan to call more things at the line of scrimmage. That was a big complaint about Knapp's offense when Vic was here, but the excuse then was Vic, was Michael Vick. And Todd McClure was really good at calling this blocking schemes and whatnot at the line. We don't have a center like that can do that. And even if we did get someone like Alex Mack who can do that, Matt Ryan is still better at that than Alex Mack is. And so Matt Ryan should have more control. And if Kyle Shanahan is not willing to let Matt Ryan dictate the game more from the line of scrimmage than currently is, it's not going to work. And we're going to be talking about a new offensive coordinator in 2017.
And I think that's where we saw the last 4 games of the year. Ryan was starting to get a little more comfortable in the offense. And what happened? But the Falcons not only started winning, he started making calls at the line. And the offense started doing it even better. I think with that full year under his belt, really getting into that offense, he's going to be able to make the 7 calls like he used to. That was what he was doing the other day against the Saints. He'd see 6 or 7 in the box. Then he'd go, you know what? Hey, we're going to run the 7 call. We're going to run the 6 call. But, we're going to, with a 6-man in the box, we're going to run the ball. With 7 men in the box, we're going to pass the ball.
Okay. All right. One more from Evan Birchfield. He asked, if Roddy comes back for another season, what's your thoughts on his role?
I think he sees a reduced role. I think Hardy is going to get the role that he's actually at.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in his career, Roddy is essentially only good to be a slot receiver, which is kind of what Justin Hardy's role is. And I don't really see Justin Hardy being a great outside receiver. So for me personally, I think if you keep Roddy next year, one of those guys is going to suffer because I think they're essentially the same player at the same point in their careers. You're not going to be able to maximize both Justin Hardy and Roddy White in this offense. Roddy has essentially been on the decline the last 3 years, and of all people, it was fascinating to me doing the research this past offseason and looking up and seeing how much more productive Harry Douglas was when he played outside than what Roddy White has been the last couple of years, which was shocking to me because everybody knew that Harry Douglas was not good when he was on the outside. He was only really good as a slot receiver. So to me, it's one of those things. If the Falcons keep Roddy White, it's going to be another. I just can't imagine a scenario where Roddy White's on this roster and the Falcons are good because you just have this giant black hole on your offense that's just sucking up money and playing time that's not benefiting your offense one bit. So it's going to be another inconsistent year if Roddy White's back. All right, we have Andrew Schauweiler. He has another one. Do you think not having a solid center made a difference in the offense as well? We already answered that question. That was what Scott was talking about earlier. So I think, yes, Andrew, not having a solid center did make a difference. All right, we got another one from Evan Birchfield. He says, next year is the final season in the Georgia Dome. Excited for the new stadium or sad to see it go?
I mean, I'm not a fan of the Georgia Dome. I'm glad they're tearing it down. If I'm just going to be honest with you, I haven't been a fan of it really ever.
Stadiums are dumb. I mean, I'm not excited for the new stadium. I'm sure it's gonna be an awesome experience for people going there, and then 2 or 3 years, the allure is gonna wear off, and it's just gonna be like any other NFL stadium with cool features and whatnot. If you're willing to pay the money to get the features, but you're there to watch a football game. If you watch a good football team, it doesn't matter what stadium you're in. If you're watching a bad football team, then it doesn't matter how awesome and comfortable and cool the stadium is. It's just, it's putting lipstick on a horse or whatever that statement is, whatever that idiom is. It's just a waste of time. And I'm not a huge fan of the Georgia Dome to begin with either. It's all right. It's fine. It's a stadium. Okay, Evan Birchfield, pass rush comparison of this year and last year.
I think the Falcons hit the quarterback a lot more this year, but they did have more sacks last year. It's bad either way.
Yeah, using Pro Football Focus metrics, this year they had 20 sacks, 67 hits, 163 hurries. Last year they had 26 sacks, 47 hits, 176 hurries. So I think it lines up, if you add them all up together, it's about the same. I do feel like our pass rush was a little bit better. I felt a little bit more confident than I did with it last year. But overall, it was maybe like 5 or 10% better this year, I think, over the course of 16 games. It still was underwhelming, but at least there were glimpses of a good pass rush, as opposed we basically had like 1 or 2 games last year where we had a real pass rush. And then we probably had done it for 3 or 4 games this year. All right. Crandall McCrary asks, is bringing Mario Williams financially feasible? How he would seem to be a perfect fit at strong side defensive end.
I mean, Williams has to take a pay cut. Unless Williams takes like $5-6 million a year, he won't be a Falcon.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like, I think it's financially feasible because we have a lot of cap space. It just depends on what sort of contract that Williams is going to want to get in the open market. Like, ideally, you would look at him and say, oh, we'll get him on a deal similar to what DeMarcus Ware signed a couple of years ago with Denver, which was like a 3-year, $10 million deal or something like that. But probably in all honesty, I think Mario Williams is going to look for like Robert Quinn money, which was like a 4 or 5-year deal for like $57 million. And is that feasible? Yeah, if you structure it right. But I think you're going to be in the same situation you are that Buffalo is in now, where you give him all this money, and then at a certain point, a couple of years down the line, you're going to be like, yeah, we're not getting the return on the investment. But, that's generally the case with all free agents. As for him being a strong side defensive end, I think that would be a complete misuse of Mario Williams' talent. I think he's more better fit as the Leo in this scheme than being a guy that you're going to ask to play the same role as Tyson Jackson. So it's one of those things where I think where Mario Williams is at his best, and this was the role he played when he played under Richard Smith in Houston when his career began. He was a weak side edge rusher predominantly, and I think that's really his idea. You keep Beasley on the left in your nickel sub package, keep Mario Williams on the right side, and play Mario Williams as your base Leo, so that you can have someone who can rush the quarterback over Corey Bierman playing that spot in your base package, and whoever, Rashid Hageman or Tyson Jackson or whoever you want to put as your strong side defensive end in the base package. So I think that's the ideal usage. That's how I would use Mario Williams.
I would use him the same way that Michael Bennett's actually used. Playing ideally outside most of the time, rushing from the right side most of the time, and then on third downs, sometimes you slide him inside, sometimes you just flip him to the left. But just use him a little bit of everywhere.
Okay. Digital Demon asks, what big name could you see the Falcons signing realistically in free agency?
The biggest name that they might sign is Alex Mack.
Yeah. I'm going to be curious if they make a serious move for one of these big Broncos defensive players, like Malik Jackson or Derek Wolfe or Danny Trevathan. I think there's a good chance that one of those guys is going to hit the open market. If I was betting money, I would probably say it's going to be Malik Jackson, just because I think his price tag is going to be very high, and I think the Broncos will be like, we can only keep one of them between Jackson and Derek Wolfe, and because we have Von Miller, because we have Shaq Barrett, because we have Shane Ray, we don't really need to invest that much into a interior pass rusher. So I think they might go cheaper and keep Derek Wolfe and let Malik Jackson get the, $40 or $50 million contract on the open market. And if that's the case, then I'll be curious to see if the Falcons make a serious play for him. But I wouldn't bet on us getting Malik Jackson, just because I do think someone is going to pay him a huge chunk of change to be, their big guy. And I think the Falcons will have their eyes elsewhere. Okay, we got another one from Digital Demon. What are the odds the Jets will let Muhammad Wilkerson hit free agency, and should we sign him if he does?
If Muhammad Wilkerson somehow hits free agency, yes, you should sign him. However, he is not hitting free agency. He's going to get tagged.
Yeah, I would say the chance of him hitting free agency is like 0.001%. Like, basically, the only way he doesn't get tagged is if the Jets are the worst run organization in the league. Like, they'd just be idiotic to not tag him. even if they don't intend to give him a long-term contract because of Leonard Williams and whatnot, it just doesn't make, and Sheldon Richardson, it just doesn't make sense to not tag him. You can keep him. Why not? Why wouldn't you? You know, and the reality is the way the tag is used over the last 7 or 8 years, most guys don't get long-term deals. They just use it like we use with Brent Grimes, where we just keep you for 1 year and then we move on. And I think that's probably what the Jets will wind up doing, and Muhammad Wilkerson will be pissed off about it. He'll hold out in camp. All the same rigmarole that we hear year in and year out, that's probably what's going to happen. And, but he'll still be a Jet next year. All right. Noah Williams asks, any thoughts on Derek Wolfe in the Falcons scheme?
I mean, I wouldn't mind Derek Wolfe. I think he's a pretty solid football player. Do I love him in the Falcons scheme? Probably not, but he could play that same fit that we would want Tyson Jackson to play against the run, and I think he'd provide more as a pass rusher.
Yeah, it's interesting. Denver, when Wolfe was a rookie, Denver would play him at left defensive end in the base and then kick him inside in their nickel. He wasn't great. He's not a great pass rusher. He's a lot like Rashid Hageman. He's a power player that doesn't have great quickness. You know, he can overpower a guy, but he's not really going to give you a ton of pressure week in and week out. So I think basically what Derek Wolfe is a younger, better version of Tyson Jackson who can do more than what Tyson Jackson could do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're gonna sign Derek Wolfe, you're paying him to be a run stopper first, and then a distant, maybe our sixth best pass rusher. He's not going to make a big difference there, but he's probably an upgrade over Tyson Jackson. All right. Noah Williams has another question. Can you give a few free agent linebackers you would like us to sign, and what will it take to bring them in?
Let's see. Danny Trevathan, Miracle from God. Orlando McClain, a similar miracle. Mark Barron, I think he's a linebacker. I think he'd be a solid 3-year, $8 million deal. Let's see. Outside of that, talk about the for the draft.
Yeah. I'm about Jarrell Freeman would probably be the one guy because I think he's basically the player that we want Durant to be. The one knock on Jarrell Freeman is I think he's already 29 because he played in Canada for a couple of years. Other than that, I know people want me to say Bruce Irvin. I wouldn't mind us signing Bruce Irvin. I would certainly want him on the team, but I just think he's going to want more money than what we're willing to give him. I bring Philip Wheeler back to be the backup to Justin Durant, but I'm with Scott. I'd really like to see us upgrade in the draft more so than spending any more free agent money on linebackers. I think we're fine. I think Durant, Schofield, Wheeler, basically I would take our current linebacker group and add a first-round pick to it, and I think we'll be fine at linebacker, at least for this year. And then we can deal with replacing Brooks Reed and Justin Durant and whoever else in 2017.
And I think you might even have Brooks Reed replacement on the roster long term.
That might be true.
That might be his better role long term. I mean, yeah. And people are going to be cheap. They're restricted free agent. Wheeler's going to be cheap. He's 31 years old and past his prime. So you could probably, for the 3 guys, spend maybe $4 million after tenders and everything.
Yeah. I know Steven Johnson, who Richard Smith coached in Denver, got cut by the Broncos, played with the Titans now. You know, he'd be a decent backup, special team sort of guy. But, you know, yeah, I think we're kind of good at linebackers, just really getting a stud in draft as opposed to a free agent. All right. Rick Morris, 708 asks, do you think the new staff would take a chance on Miles Jack if available at 17? They seem to stay away from injured players.
If Miles Jack is there at 17 and they don't take him, they'd be stupid.
Yeah, I've said it before. I think Miles Jack is going to be the number one player on the draft board. Jeff Ulbrich coached him at UCLA, was his defensive coordinator for 2 years, was his position coach, or defensive coordinator for 1 year and position coach for another year. He fits the scheme perfectly. He can play middle linebacker. You know, he has that sort of Bobby Wagner upside potentially. Great coverage guy. Would really help out with our inability to cover tight ends and cover the middle of the field. Great speed, great power, athletic. You know, he's a great player. And because you look at some of the other top players in this draft class that aren't going to be at 17, you know, that are going to be top 10 picks, definitely. I think Jack is going to be number one on their board, the number one target. And if he slips out of the top 10, then, you know, maybe we can start having, you know, we'll talk about this later in the offseason. We'll see how it plays out. But if he slips out of the top 10, maybe people start having conversations about moving up 3 or 4 spots to get him if he starts to slide. All right. Noah Williams asked, do y'all like Shaq Lawson or Emmanuel Ogbah better?
Do you like chocolate or do you like peanut butter better? I would love to have them both on the roster. I think Ogbah is a better fit for what the Falcons need because I think he's a better run defender. And I do like his pass rush ability. Ogbah, to me, reminds me a lot more of Charles Johnson, where Shaq Lawson's a lot closer to that Michael Bennett type. It's really what do you think the Falcons should take first? And I would much rather see a Charles Johnson type than a Michael Bennett type. Because the Charles Johnson type finishes and creates sacks, where Michael Bennett type gets a bunch of pressure and may finish 8 or 9 of those.
Okay, that's interesting. Ogbah's got upside. I was a little disappointed with his play against Mississippi State. He got shut down by Laramie Tunsil. Obviously, Laramie Tunsil is Laramie Tunsil, for people that don't know. You can expect to hear some Jason Peters sort of comps when we get to draft time with Laramie Tunsil. I'm assuming we'll hear. So it's not – but if you're a first-round pick like Ogbah's projected to be, I would like to see you do a better job against a top 5 left tackle than he did in that game. Most of his pressures came when he was lined up opposite Tunsil and going against the backup tackles in that game. He's a good player, don't get me wrong. I think he could definitely play the Leo spot in this scheme. I think he's probably a little bit more natural rushing from the left side, though. But I feel like Beasley's going to be entrenched there because he was so much better there this year at the end of the year than he was on the right side at the beginning of the year. So I don't know if Ogbah and Beasley can play as nice together as we would hope. I do like Shaq Lawson better than Ogbah. I think he's got more upside. I thought it's interesting that you compared Ogbah to Charles Johnson. I would probably compare Shaq Lawson more to Charles Johnson. He reminds me a little bit more of him. So, yeah, I like Shaq Lawson better. I think he's a better player. Oh, next question is, what do you think about Shaq Lawson? So I guess I'll go a little bit more in depth. Why do I like Shaq Lawson? I like his size. I like his power. He's not a speed rusher, but I do feel like given his bigger frame, his sturdier, I think if he's going to be more of an edge rusher in the NFL and not be sort of an inside-outside guy or whatever people want him to be, I think he probably could stand to drop 10 or 15 pounds and get quicker and be more explosive and basically be, and get into another comparison that Scott just made, more Michael Bennett, because Michael Bennett lost weight as he got into the NFL. particularly where he is in Seattle versus where he was at this last year in Texas A&M, because he was playing in a 3-4 defense and whatnot. But yeah, I think Lawson has a lot more upside to be more of a matchup nightmare for pass rushers and to play either left side or right side. All right. Last question comes from Mr. JATL. He asks, do you think we can win a Super Bowl with Matt Ryan?
Yes.
Yes, if we get a defense.
I don't think Matt Ryan was the issue in Atlanta this year. I think the issue was it was a first-year setup. Just get the Falcons some time in the offense and get a center who knows how to snap a fucking ball.
There you go. Couldn't say it better myself. All right, folks, we appreciate it. We will be back next week to talk about some. I think Arthur Blank's press conference is going to be probably next Monday, so I'm sure he'll give us some bombs to talk about on next week's show. So we'll talk about that. Send in your mailbag questions. Use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag so it's easier for us to find them. You can tweet at the show at FalconsPFC. I'm also on Twitter. I'm at FalcFan. Scott is at Karasik S. Be sure to subscribe and rate us on iTunes, Falcon Central Radio. Head on over to ProFootballCentral.com and you can find the links and all that stuff to subscribe there. And yeah, that'll be a show. And we got a long off season upcoming. A lot of talking about Alex Mack and Miles Jack, and whatever stuff. So appreciate everybody for watching the show and listening to the show. And we'll be back next week.